Hello, everyone. It's Sinead Whelehan, and I'm back with you and Barbara Lamb for Barbara School, episode number 6. And tonight we are going to be talking about Sasquatch, which is not a topic that a lot of people know that Barbara has a very big interest in. And she had an experience with Sasquatch herself. So she's going to tell us about that and also elaborate a bit on Sasquatch's role here on Earth. I'm personally very excited about this because I really love Sasquatch and I feel like they're a guardian for our planet, and they go through quite a lot of hardship when it comes to us humans not understanding them properly. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And Barbara, as always, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And
Good.
very happy to be with you and very happy to be talking about the Sasquatch because I think they are very, very special beings.
Agreed.
Right. So I don't remember when I became interested in Sasquatch, but I remember when I first heard that there was a conference being given about Sasquatch beings up in northern Washington state. I immediately signed up for that conference and went to it. And the conference was out in the very wooded, hilly area of northeastern Washington state. And the forests around this very rural sort of conference center, the forests were full of Sasquatch beings.
Mm.
So that was a very appropriate person to, appropriate place, I should say, to hold that conference. So I went through that conference and I cannot say that I saw a Sasquatch then, but I saw where the Sasquatch had been, certain indications of them. For instance, there were little designs left on the ground, on the pathways, um, designs that apparently people had not made, made with sticks and twigs and vines and sometimes acorns or berries, all natural ingredients from the forest.
Mhm.
And we would see them left along the pathway where we would be walking to go from one of the conference buildings to another. And one day we walked up a trail to go to the outdoor amphitheater for part of the conference. And there was a stump, a big, thick stump there, just right by the side of the dirt trail. And I noticed that the stump had a little indentation in the middle of it. Didn't think very much of it, just simply noticed it as walking by and talking with people. And then a couple of hours later, when we all walked back down that trail past that stump again, I noticed that then it had about 5 shiny, colorful marbles
Mm.
in that little indentation.
Mm.
And I thought, well, that's strange because I thought everybody at the conference, even the cooking staff, had gone up to that amphitheater for that part of the conference. Nobody was left behind that I knew of. And so, who put those marbles there? So I began to mention that to a couple of people, and some of them who knew more about the Sasquatch than I did at the time. And they said, oh, well, probably the Sasquatch came and put the marbles in the stump because Sasquatch beings really seem to love marbles.
Mhm.
And marbles are very, very pretty. You know, they're round, they're a lovely shape, and they're glassy looking, and they have beautiful colors in them. And somehow the Sasquatch really love them. Now, how they get hold of marbles, I don't know because nobody seems to see them going into stores and buying marbles. So, but so whether they take them from people who have marbles or not, I don't know. But anyway, that was my first thought of, oh, maybe they've just been here with us while we didn't even know it. Of course, we all thought that the woods surrounding this conference center and amphitheater were loaded with Sasquatch, and I really think that's true because of all the little clues that we saw around. One thing that I particularly noticed near the amphitheater area was that, well, there were lots of tall trees, tall, very straight, wonderful trees. And then there were two trees that had a horizontal tree, a big tree trunk having been broken off from the lower part at one end and laid across two notches in these two upright trees.
Oh, interesting.
And that was all about 18 or 20 feet up on the tree. Now, a person was not going to do that, and it was too wooded for any heavy equipment to have gotten into where that horizontal log was placed.
Mhm.
So it seemed to me that that was a very outstanding example of what the Sasquatch must have done.
Oh, it sounds
So
like.
that was great. Anyway, I went back the next year, which was a couple of years ago, just before, I think it was 2019, just before COVID stopped our going to conferences.
Mhm.
And this time was even better. I saw more of these designs on the ground and recognized right away, the Sasquatch are leaving us pictures and maybe symbols full of meaning, even if we're not sure what the meaning is. I
Mhm.
also saw along the side of the road leading to this conference center that there was a big arch made of a single tree, a sapling that had been bent over, and where it hit the ground on the other side, it was padded down with a mixture of dirt or mud, I should say, and rocks and leaves, in order to hold the tip of the tree down. So it was this beautiful curving arch. We
Mhm.
figured about 40 feet high in the highest point.
Wow.
And I mentioned this to one of the local people, and they said, oh, yeah, that is definitely done by the Sasquatch. And it is showing, as far as we could figure, it's showing the the edge of their territory. So it's probably to let other Sasquatch know that this is their land where their tribe of Sasquatch live. So then we took walks through the woods in that area on that trip and saw lots and lots of designs made, laid on the forest floor with sticks and twigs and vines and growing things. And they were very clever, sometimes circles, sometimes triangles, sometimes perfect squares, sometimes rectangles, sometimes trapezoids. I mean, they were very deliberate designs, and it was very obvious that
Mhm.
they were. And we also saw things like many poles of uh, parts of trees along sticks, in other words, forming what we would consider a teepee shape. And often that teepee shaped structure would be um, sort of leaning against a tree, sort of attached by vines to a tree. And they always seemed to have an entrance area that was wider. So apparently, the Sasquatch go into those teepee shapes, maybe to be alone. Some of us think they might even meditate. We don't know, but they build a private place like that. We also saw on the ground kind of an oval shaped lump that was fairly large. And it was suggested by some of the local people that that might be that they have made of sticks, vines, grasses, leaves. They might have made a birthing chamber for one of their females actually giving birth.
Wow.
Anyway, it did seem to be a chamber that the beings, or maybe one being at a time, could get into. So it was really interesting to see these things. And I wondered if I had ever seen them in other forests and just simply didn't recognize what I was seeing.
Mhm.
That's very possible, because the Sasquatch beings do live all over the world.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, so they're in probably every country that has the right kind of territory, which means forests, reasonable wilderness areas in that country, and there are likely to be Sasquatch beings living there. Well, at the second Sasquatch conference I went to, and I happened to be a speaker, so that was especially fun to be even more part of it. And after I had given my lecture one night, I stepped outside the building at this conference center, and there were about 5 or 6 men. Some of them were Native American men, some of them were regular American men. They were all standing there outside the building where I had been speaking. And I, of course, said hello, and what are you all doing right here? And they said, well, we're talking to our Sasquatch friend. So, of course, I looked more carefully at them and didn't see a Sasquatch, but I was excited. I thought, oh, good, maybe I'll get to see one or meet one. And they said, we have one right here. And he's in his invisible shape, his non physical shape at the moment, because there are so many people here who would see him.
Mm.
So I said, well, where is he? And they said, he's right here. They pointed to a gap, like they were 3 men, a gap, and then 2 other men
Ah.
right there. So they pointed to the gap, and of where the Sasquatch being was standing, they said. So I was thrilled, and I hoped that it was true. And I thought, well, I am accustomed with my hands to going into crop circles in England and feeling the energies.
Yeah.
And in many years of going, 27 years of going to England in the summers, I would get sensitive to feeling where the ley lines of energy were going through the earth. So I thought, oh, well, maybe I can sense him since I have some sensitivity in my hands. And so I went over to that gap and sort of reached in, and at a certain point, oh, maybe 2 or 3 inches into that gap between the men, I suddenly felt a real distinct change of the feeling of energy. Could
Mm.
feel it in my hands. And I said, oh, I feel it's different here. I feel like he's right here. And the men who had been talking to that Sasquatch and had gotten really accustomed to exactly where he was
Uh-huh.
in the gap, they said, yeah, you've got him, you've got him, you've got him. So
Mhm.
I just dropped my hands and talked to the Sasquatch and thanked him very much for trusting enough to be with these people, trusting enough to let me come toward him and feel the energy, and trusted, thanked him for all the caring that he and the others do for the forests and for the earth, and just really praising him for a lot of different things, and saying that we all come in peace and we want to have a peaceful relationship with them, and we thank them. So it was just a very special experience for me of being able to express that to a Sasquatch, because I'd already learned so many things about them,
Mhm.
and had come to respect them and appreciate them very much, way beyond just the initial curiosity, which of course I had had at first. So anyway, Sasquatch are really, really big life forms, and they live partly on Earth. And of course, we know many traces, the Bigfoot footprints and so forth, and some of the hair left on branches or little parts sticking out from trees and so forth. We definitely know that they are here, and they have been seen, and they have been photographed and videotaped to some extent. And we know that they're very, very tall. They're usually at least 7 feet tall, maybe 8 feet or 9 feet or 10 feet tall, and very, very bulky and muscular. And they have this sort of dense, long fur.
Mhm.
Hard to say if it's fur or hair or sort of a combination of both. And and then all of that fur comes all over them except for the faces. And the faces, having been seen by many people, remind people of human faces, very human-like, and yet with a very, very short texture of fur on them. But some people have gotten close enough to see a Sasquatch and said, wow, that's not an animal, that is a person. And yet the person is so big and furry, has all this wonderful hair covering to protect them from the cold. It's really quite extraordinary. And so a Bigfoot, because of his size and his different looks, can seem very threatening to people, can seem as if he'd be very ferocious or dangerous. And yet there are so many testimonies from people that they're not. They don't behave like that at all. They don't ever, at least I have never heard a report of one coming in any kind of threatening way toward a person.
Yeah.
Although they need to protect themselves. And apparently they have learned that humans can be very dangerous, especially those who seem to be carrying those weapons.
Yes.
That could really be very bad for them. So they need to protect themselves. And so sometimes they will let out a great growl or what could be described as a roar. And sometimes they will emit a very, very strong, obnoxious scent,
Mhm.
kind of the way that a skunk probably
Mhm.
does that too. And the scent is so strong that people don't want to have anything to do with it. It will usually chase people away. And that's for their own protection, not to be mean to people, I don't think, but just simply for their own safety. So they tend to be very elusive. And if they're in a woods area where there are people tromping around, trying to find them, looking for them, um, they, tend to creep out of the area or disappear as much as they possibly can for their own safety. And they might emit the smell, or they might emit the growl, or just sort of fade away into what we see as invisibility.
Mhm.
And that's one of the most remarkable things about them, that they seem to be able to go from being very physical, very sturdy, very here, very present, and then within seconds, 1 or 2 seconds even, they will just not be seen anymore. They have become invisible or non-physical. So that leads us to think that they are non-physical or interdimensional figures that live sometimes here and sometimes who knows where, elsewhere in a non-physical dimension. And that's very handy for them to have that ability. So at one of those conferences in Washington, I did a regression on a woman, and she went back in the regression to when she had been a year or two earlier at the East Seti Ranch in southern Washington state. And that is James Gilliland's wonderful place where many people gather, especially in the warmer months, to watch the many, many UFOs that come out of Mount Adams that is seen across a big field there at the ECD Ranch. So this woman had been there for one of the weekends of sky watching, and she was sleeping in a tent, got up to use the outhouse in the middle of the night. And on her way back to the tent, she was just about to get back into her tent. And she looked out in this big, big field that was right there. And she saw someone walking across the field, a big someone. And so she looked more closely and she recognized it was a Sasquatch being. And the Sasquatch are known for living in the forests in that area. So she watched the Sasquatch being walking across the field. And after a few moments, he looked around and he noticed her looking at him. It's like their eyes locked for a moment. And then as she continued to watch, he became less and less visible. And after about 10 or 12 steps, she didn't see him at all. He had gone back into his invisible or his non-physical state of being. That was really quite a thrilling thing to actually witness.
Yes.
And
Wow.
then at that same conference, I regressed a woman who had visited her grandparents who lived in a cabin at the edge of a forest here in the United States. And when she was 2 years old, she was taken by the Sasquatch. They came to that cabin and appeared inside and took her when it was her nap time. And the grandparents didn't even know that the Sasquatch was there. He just came, very gently picked her up, took her out of the house and into the woods. And she stayed there with him for several hours with this Sasquatch and the family of the Sasquatch. At least that's what she assumed it was. And they just played with her and they looked at her and they picked her up and they carried her around and they fed her something. And then they put her back in the arms of the one who had taken her. And he walked back to the house and put her back in her bed, in the crib that she was sleeping in, and completely unharmed, completely okay. And because they were very gentle with her and she was only 2 years old, she didn't mind the way they looked. I mean, they just were very sweet and friendly and nice, and it was comforting being picked up and carried in these great big furry arms. So it turned out to be a really nice experience for her. And it was a very nice experience for the woman who had had that experience when she was 2 years old to relive that experience in the regression. Was really a very lovely feeling for her. So that is so nice. And so I just want to say that the Sasquatch do live all over the world, as I have mentioned, and they live in forests and mountains and sometimes dense swamp areas and just really remote areas. Sometimes they live in these forest areas that are near farms or near houses, near gardens, near farm fields, and that's where they can get some of their food. And they are often seen in the nighttime, especially way out in a field. If it's a big farm, the farmer might see them way back at the other end of a big field taking some of the produce that's growing there. And the farmers usually think, okay, well, that being needs food just like the rest of us do. So that's okay. They don't try to go and chase them off or anything like that. Sometimes they live near Indian reservations. And the Indians, the Native Americans, have a very different attitude about them than most of us humans do. They welcome them sort of as cousins or brothers, and often will develop a rapport with the Sasquatch. And that's a very nice arrangement too. And they will also share food in that whatever they're growing, if the Sasquatch comes to take that, that seems to be okay with Native American. So this happens near Dulce, New Mexico, for as one of those places where the Sasquatch come. And sometimes they come into town. And I talked with a person when I was there speaking at a conference in Dulce. I spoke to one of the local residents who said that in back of that person's house there in Dulce, there was sort of an old camping trailer. And between the camping trailer and the house, sometimes they would see a Sasquatch adult with a Sasquatch child, sort of camping out there in that sort of secluded area. And the person who saw that outside the house really liked that. They weren't being bothered by that mother Sasquatch and the child. They just said, okay, well, if they need that for shelter, that's all right. And then in the morning, the woman would go out and check around the back, and they were not there anymore, but she could see where grasses had been sort of pressed down where the Sasquatch must have slept. And there are stories about Sasquatch coming into homes or near homes in Sun Valley, Idaho. And that's a nice ski area and wilderness area. And often the Sasquatch are seen in areas where there are also UFOs seen by the people there. And very often they're seen in relationship to orbs flying around. And they are seen in areas that are considered to be portals from this third dimensional Earth place that we're on, portals to other dimensions of reality. And they're seen sometimes in areas where there are skinwalkers appearing here and there, such as Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. And sometimes the Sasquatch are seen in areas where there are cattle mutilations. And also, there are reports of Sasquatch having been seen in or near haunted buildings. So, and I've heard also they've seen near cemeteries. I think they've seen just about anywhere. So there are a lot of them. And of course, they're, as I said, very elusive. So they might be seen by one person. And if that person goes to get somebody else to come and see it, the Sasquatch might not be there anymore because they, in most cases, do not feel trusting about being seen by people, because some of them really have been killed by people. So they're called all kinds of different names in different countries in the world. We call them Bigfoot or Sasquatch. In Australia, they are called the Yowie. In China, they're called the Yaren. In Russia, they're called the Almas. And in Siberia, they're called the Alma. And some places they're called skunk ape. In some places they're called scatica. In some places, scooch cam. Other places are called wild men of the north, or they're called ape people by some. But I think that they're all talking about the same types of beings, although in the Himalayan mountains, that area of the world, they're snow white in fur, which is very appropriate because that's what their territory looks like much of the year. in the higher areas, certainly all year round, and they are called the Yeti. But we think that they're the same basic species as what we call the Sasquatch and the Bigfoot. They also seem to live underground, in caves too, and otherwise sort of dug out areas. Now, how they dig out the ground to be a big enough room for a group of them to be in, as large as they are, I don't know. They must use sticks or who knows what. But anyway, they do dig out these big rooms underground, and very often they will cover over the room at ground level with very slim tree branches, twigs, sticks, and then a covering of leaves. So, in other words, somebody could be walking through the forest and walk onto that area, not realizing that there's a whole room underneath, and fall through. And this actually happened to a man I have heard of, and he fell down about 8 or 10 feet into this square or rectangular shaped room where there was a whole group of Sasquatch sitting there, and they were eating very peacefully. They were awake, conscious, and they saw him fall through this roof, and they didn't do anything to disturb him. They realized that he was absolutely startled, of course, and terrified.
Yes.
So instead of doing anything to harm him, a couple of them came over and just lifted him up and put him back up on the ground, and then pulled the covering of sticks and leaves over them again.
Oh my
So
gosh.
the man was all right. It was just very shocked and probably traumatized, but he was all right for having done that. So that was very, very, very fortunate for him. So gosh, there's so many things that I could say about them, but I'd like to mention some of the clues that they leave, that they are in that area. And maybe the clues are to really communicate among themselves as well. I certainly think that's very likely. Anyway, they leave these gifts, I call them gifts, of these pictures, these designs of leaves, twigs, little sticks, berries, acorns, nuts, whatever, on the ground. And, they seem to be deliberate designs. It's not just a rubble of stuff. It's very specifically placed design, just left there right on the ground. So they probably are full of meaning, from one Sasquatch group to another, I should think. Or maybe they're just done as artwork. Who knows? We just can't know. But also, I think one thing that's very touching is that sometimes a person who either lives in an area in the woods or right near the woods, or a camper living in such an area or staying in such an area, will, if that person will leave a little plate or a napkin or something of some food out for the Sasquatch, the person will notice that the next morning that food is gone, and in place of the food, the Sasquatch has left a little gift. At least we take it that way, as a gift. And the gift might be made of nuts and little vines and twigs, and again, berries and things that are found out there in the woods, in nature. And sometimes it's like a form of a little pendant that a person could actually wear. In some cases, that has been in the form of what looks like a little human doll, with a head shape and a little body, arms, legs, hands, feet. And I mean, to think that these wild animals can make something very small, very defined, very particular, and looking like something, like a person. I think that is really pretty clever and very nice that when they are given food and they don't see the person who's given it, but they will leave that as a thank you, it certainly seems. And then there's the case, I just love this, of a man who went fishing in Sasquatch territory. And there was a beautiful river, and he had caught two lovely salmon fish. And he was taking the hooks out and, looking at the fish. And he looked up, and several feet away, suddenly there was a Sasquatch being, a big one, probably a big male. And so the man who had caught the fish thought, oh my gosh, I better give these fish to the Sasquatch. So he gave both salmon, beautiful fish, to the Sasquatch. And the Sasquatch started to walk away and then stopped and came back and gave one of the salmon to the man.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that is so much fair play. The Sasquatch certainly could have taken both of those and probably would have liked to have taken both of those for him and his family. But he had that sense of fair play that he gave it back to the fisherman. So he had one and the fisherman had one. I mean, that was really, really nice, I think. And they seem to be very thoughtful. So they seem to communicate telepathically with each other. They also seem to communicate telepathically with people. And some people have the ability to pick that up. Other people probably don't. So if you have a group camping at the edge of a forest or in a forest, one might be actually getting messages and the rest of them wouldn't. So the rest of them might or might not believe the one who is saying, oh, the Sasquatch are here. And they're saying, welcome, that's okay. You stay there by your campfire and we'll stay where we are. But it's all right, And so sometimes there will be simple messages like that. And they also seem to have a real psychic ability as well. And they seem to detect psychically whether a group of people who's come into their territory are safe or whether they're not safe. And they will behave accordingly. And when they know that the people visiting the area are of goodwill, that they're not out there to shoot them or capture them or, imprison them, take them back and make a big fortune out of showing them and all that. They seem to consider that. And so when they know that the people are just there camping and would be friendly with them, not try to misuse them in any way, that they will try to do things to let the people know that they're there. For instance, there are many testimonies of small groups of campers in or near the woods, and usually in the night, but it can happen in the daytime too, that suddenly they will be aware that little stones are being thrown from the woods at them, but the stones never hit them. It seems like the Sasquatch are throwing the stones very carefully with good aim to go between the people and not to hit anyone. So that's kind of like saying, okay, you guys, we're here, and we're okay. We just want to let you know that we're here because you may have come to try to see us. And so it's very harmless. And I think that's wonderful. And sometimes the Sasquatch, at a distance from people who've come into the forest, they'll start doing a rhythm with sticks. Now, these might be pretty good sized sticks, so that be like one piece of wood hitting another, and they'll do a a rhythm like we might do with a drum beat. And it seems to have a pattern like dot, 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 or something like that, a regular pattern to it. And then it's happened that some people have been able to look around and find sticks for themselves and answer back the same pattern. And then the pattern will change. The Sasquatch will add another pattern of taps, and the person will do that. So it gets to be like an antiphonal chorus of stick knocking patterns, like a drum beat. And that's wonderful because it shows that there's really a very intelligent communication going on, pretty sophisticated, actually,
Yes.
when you think about it. I mean, that is really, really delightful. They're also very psychic in the sense of knowing when a person visiting the area might really need help. And there's a wonderful true story of a man who was very interested in Sasquatch in a friendly way and wanted terrifically much to see a couple of them. So he found out that there was a place up high in the mountains in Colorado, a particular place at the end of a road that would go up there, where the Sasquatch lived. So this man went up there in the daytime with his truck by himself and parked at the top of the road trail and looked around and didn't see any Sasquatch, and got back in his truck and put it in reverse and backed up so he could turn around and go back the dirt road. But when he backed up, he backed the back 2 tires off the edge of the cliff.
Ooh.
And so when he started the car to go forward, it wouldn't go forward because the back tires were hanging off the edge of the cliff.
Oh my gosh.
And he thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I'm up here alone. There's no one to help. And there's no way that I can possibly lift the rear of the truck up off the cliff and back onto the road. And he was, really distressed about that. And then suddenly he felt something. He felt the truck moving, and he looked out the rear view mirror and the side mirror and noticed that there were 4 big Sasquatch beings there at the side of the cliff, lifting up the whole backside of his truck.
Oh my gosh.
And pushing it forward completely onto the road so that the man could drive away.
Oh,
And
wow.
as he drove away, he looked around and he did get a pretty good look at them, these 4 big, husky males who had apparently, well, they'd either seen him being stuck or psychically knew that he was in trouble and immediately just came to help. I think that is just so wonderful.
Yes.
For really quite a number of stories like that, where they've really come to somebody's rescue. In fact, there's a case where there's there had been a campfire in or near the woods that some people had left, but they left some of the little ashes and little pieces burning slightly when they drove away. And then the Sasquatch came and stomped out those ashes, those cinders. So there was no fire left at all. And then the next people who came saw that the cinders and the little bits of charcoal had been totally stomped out by big feet. So that's another example of they're taking care of their environment, which they certainly seem to do. So they didn't bother the people at all. They just came and took care of the fire that was still going and suddenly shouldn't be. So it's interesting that people have heard their noises sometimes. Sometimes their noises sound like deep growls, sometimes like grunts, sometimes like howls. sometimes a bit more like deep chatter. And there's a man named Ron Moorhead who has gone into the forest and actually recorded a whole series of sounds that the Sasquatch make. And it's published in a CD called Sierra Sounds. And it's the voices of some of the Sasquatch. And it's really an extraordinary connection or collection. Sometimes the Sasquatch seem to be communicating back and forth with each other. Sometimes it seems like it's probably an adult communicating with one of the Sasquatch children, just by the way it's speaking. Sometimes it may be like the Sasquatch are having an argument in a discussion. Sometimes it seems to be just warning people that they are there, don't come too close, because they can sound pretty ferocious.
Mhm.
And sometimes they can sound more gentle, like, okay, we're here, you're here, okay, let's just be okay with that, just leave each other alone. Seems like they were saying that. They can also write on paper, at least some of them can, which is amazing. Like I have two friends who spent some time separately, separate occasions, on the island of Kauai in Hawaii. And one of them camped on a beach that was right near the edge of the thick forest. And she knew that Sasquatch were there. She had heard that. And so she had a big tablet of paper, one of those big, long, legal length yellow tablets of paper, and a crayon. And she wrote a simple message, like to the Sasquatch, hoping that they would come and see the message when she would be sleeping in the tent at night. So she left it right next to the tent. And she went to bed in the tent, slept all night, but she did hear kind of a shuffling noise in the sand around the tent. And then, but she didn't get up to do anything about it. But in the morning, when she came out of her tent, she noticed that, yeah, there were footprints from the beings, the Sasquatch beings having been there. And also she noticed that on that yellow tablet of paper uh, had been written like a child just beginning to learn to write, would write, and kind of awkwardly, but it said, "Hello, friends." So how the Sasquatch knew about hello and how to write it, and how they knew about the word friends and how to write it, I don't know, but it was there. They were actually doing a nice, friendly communication. And they had probably come to the tent, out of curiosity. Here's one of those humans sleeping in a tent, which we could take down in a second if we wanted to, but of course they didn't. They were very respectful. So I think that was really, really lovely. And then another friend of mine went to the same island, but a different beach area, the island of Kauai. And she camped on the beach as well by herself. And she did notice during the night that there was a very, very, very strong odor. And she thought, oh, I wonder if that's a Bigfoot, because she had heard that they can emit this strong negative smelling of odor. And so she walked along the beach quite a ways and smelling this and getting used to it. As you smell it more and more, you get more adjusted to it. So it wasn't too bad after a while. And then out of the woods at the edge of the sand came what she described as a Sasquatch female. And exactly why she knew it was a female, I don't know, but she was sure it was. And they both stopped, and they were several feet apart from each other, but they had a communication. So my friend had known about the Sasquatch and respected them very, very much, and was not startled or frightened to see one. And especially that this particular female Sasquatch just seemed so comfortable, so gentle, so nice, so safe. And so they actually started communicating. It was mostly telepathically, which means that my friend had the ability to pick up the telepathic talking, which is good. I wonder if all of us would, because maybe we all have telepathic ability and we don't even know it, or maybe not. But anyway, my friend did have that ability and was very, very open and pleased to see this female Sasquatch. And maybe it helped that it was a female, who knows? Maybe it would have been a little bit more awesome, frightening, even if it had been a male. But the female started telling her that they are partly here and they partly live elsewhere. And when they come here, they're very caring about the earth itself.
Mm.
They don't want much to do with humanity, but they care very much about earth and say it is the most extraordinary, amazing planet of all the planets. It has so much life, so many species, it's so many resources. It's so beautiful. It grows food for everyone, for all of the life forms, not just for people, but for all of the millions of life forms. There's always some kind of food for each one of those types of life forms. And they're here to make sure that it all works beautifully and well together. She also went on to say that the beings are here sometimes, and sometimes they leave. They become non-physical, and they go up through channels in the air, long, sometimes winding channels that will fit one Sasquatch at a time. And they'll go up way, 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 way up into space in those channels. And sometimes the channels will branch off like a tree will branch off. And they'll start going up one and they come back and go up the other one to wherever the location is. And then they live up there in space for a while, and then they'll come back through the channels again. So she even went on to say that sometimes one of the beings will be going up through one of these channels in the air, which we don't see. They're not visible to the human eye. And they will sort of bump into another Sasquatch coming down through the same channel, because they're very narrow and they have to kind of squish past each other. But they manage to do that in a very friendly way. So they can be in either location from their point of view very, very easily at will. And when they're here on the earth, they get into their very dense physical form with all the musculature, the bulk of the hair, because they know that they need that for protection, for survival. But in the other dimensional existence they don't need a body at all. In fact, a body would not work well there. So they do that frequently at will, going back and forth, and always with a very special appreciation for the earth, even though they don't need themselves to live on the earth, because they have that other area and that other form to live in. So I think it's very special, actually, that they do choose to come here and to take care of things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we may go into a woods and think, oh, it's kind of messy. There's some fallen branches and twigs and leaves around and rocks and bushes and squashed bushes and all kinds of things. But so, I mean, it may look like it's sort of a mess in some woods. Some woods look very, very tidy, I must say. But it seems like um, it's all being cared for by the Sasquatch beings. So we have plenty of other animals that live in our woods, like deer and moose and groundhogs, porcupines, many, many different animal species. Um, but it doesn't seem, from what we can tell, doesn't seem like they actually tidy up what's left on the ground or, really clean it up. But the Sasquatch do seem to do that. They keep the forests in nice order, in good condition. It's also known that they can travel very, very fast, by foot, of course. And it's been known that they can travel up to 360 miles per day just by walking.
Wow.
And of course, they don't even need trails to walk on. They just walk through the forest, over stumps, over logs, over rocks, over whatever is there, because they're big enough and very strong enough and energetic enough that they just keep on going, no matter what is in their way.
Mhm.
And so I think that that's extraordinary that they can move that fast for that long
Mhm.
to go 360 miles just even in one single day. So, wow. Sometimes they are known to tell people about our past on the earth, about their past. They've been here for a long, long time.
Yes.
They have probably been on earth before human beings were ever on earth. So, in a way, we can say this is really their earth. This is their territory. And they also seem to have a way of knowing about the future. So that recently, in recent years, they have been warning people about the future, that if we don't get it together, get our act together, um, there may not be human beings living on the earth anymore. And they would not want to see us all go as a whole human species. But we've got to be taking better care of the earth.
Mhm.
Of course, nowadays there are some people who are doing that and working very hard to do that, but we've all got to pitch in and help with that. So they have that sense of concern as well as being able to sort of see into the future. Wow. So I think they're a very, very important part of being here in the world. I think that we're very fortunate actually to have them, and,
Mhm. I agree.
and honor them, even if we never have a chance to um, really see them or interact with them. I think it's very nice to know that they are here and they're helping. It's like they're holding of the ground. They're holding something very, very important for us. So think of them as good beings, as helpful beings. And I think that they would be only likely to attack a person if the person was there to kill, harm, or, imprison them. That would be just for self-protection. But otherwise, they they wouldn't want to do anything to harm people. And as I have said, on some occasions, they really help people too, and help the earth. So I think that's about all that I would like to share. But the people I know who have had experiences with them have felt, oh, what an honor. Oh, yes, I will tell about another situation I know about, a true situation. There was a woman visiting a Sasquatch area in the southwest portion of the United States. And she was staying in a little cabin there with a friend who had seen some Sasquatch. She knew that they were there in the deep forests. So my friend was sleeping there and woke up in the middle of the night, just feeling like she needed to go outside for whatever reason. She went outside and she felt that a sort of a swirling feeling around her. And she didn't see anything. And it wasn't as if the trees were all blowing around, but she just felt like she was being swirled around somehow, like in a little whirlwind. And then she was aware that she felt that she was in this deep forest that the cabin was just outside of. And there were two beings there, big, hulking, hairy, furry beings, very tall, 8 foot, 9 foot tall beings by her side. And they were taking her very gently by the arms, taking her, sort of lifting her a little bit from the ground and carrying her along. She was still upright to what looked like the shape of a Quonset hut deep in the woods. But the Quonset hut was covered with leaves and sticks and vines and things. So it looked kind of like a big natural lump sitting there. But then she noticed that it actually had some sort of a door, and the beings opened the door and took her in. And there was a whole group, a whole ring full, like sitting around the edges of the room of Sasquatch beings, different sizes, some somewhat different coloring of the hair, some more darkish brown and black, some more brownish sienna color, more even a little bit lighter than that. But anyway, they all seem to be the same kind of big beings with lots of hair around their face, and they all had distinctly different human faces. And there was light in there. Now, this was the middle of the night, but there was light in there somehow. But she didn't see where the light was coming from. But anyway, they were all sitting there, some of them sitting on tree stumps, some of them sitting on pieces of logs, some of them sitting right on the ground. And they gave her a seat. I think it was a short tree stump that they carried over for her. And it turned out that it was a council meeting of these beings. And they had heard of her because she was a person who was very, very involved with certain animal life forms and was quite well known for that. And they knew that she would have appreciation for them if she could know them. And indeed she did, and still does. This experience was several years ago. And so anyway, they took her in very purposely, and they seemed to have a council meeting, and they were talking among themselves, partially, she thought, telepathically, because they were silences, and partly with their words. And she could pick up a lot of it with the words, and also telepathically. And she had learned to communicate telepathically previously with other life forms. So it was not difficult for her to do this with the Sasquatch. Anyway, they said that they had brought her here to this council meeting in order for her to be sharing publicly with human beings about the peaceful intent of the Sasquatch beings being here and how they were caring very much for the forests and trying, even in some cases, to prevent forest fires. If they noticed one starting, they would do anything they could to stamp it out so that it would not become a whole forest fire. And they were telling about the various things that they were doing to care for our very precious forests. And they were very happy to know that she could be an ambassador, educating humanity about the worthwhileness, the specialness of these Sasquatch beings being on Earth. So that was a very, very positive experience that she had had.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it certainly is. And she was thrilled and still is thrilled about that. She just feels so honored. She said it was like being with the most supremely wonderful people to be with them, and yet they weren't really people. But each face looked different. Each face looked fairly human. It looked like humans of different races, even, and yet all with the fur. And yeah, so she just felt like she was with really enlightened beings, and very, very grateful for that experience. And they returned her back to the cabin and even back to her bed, and she slept the rest of the night and woke up knowing that something had happened, but didn't know all those details until we actually did a regression to that experience when more of the details came out. And she was very, very, very happy to know about those details. Right. So I think that we can all be in amazement and be in thanks and appreciation for these beings sharing the planet with us and being here for helpfulness. And when you consider it, we don't ever hear of reports of their coming in and ruining anything for a family or harming anybody or taking anybody away for a long period of time, of traumatizing anybody. So it's a very peaceful thing that they are here.
It is. It is agreed. I mean, all of the researchers that I'm aware of, for example, Kewani Lapsaritis is another one who has had a very long-standing relationship with Sasquatch, also UFOs, because of course many extraterrestrials agree with the Sasquatch that the Earth is a very precious place and that we humans need to be doing a better job of protecting the Earth and working in some symbiosis with her. So it makes a lot of sense that Sasquatch and UFOs would show up together. But all of the major researchers who've been looking at this information about Sasquatch and all their other names and all their descendants, relatives all over the world, they say the same thing, that these are beings who only visually appear to be frightening, but are actually very kind, gentle, compassionate, caring guardians of this planet and don't want to harm humans or anything here. So, the consistency is around the world, and also those stories of Sasquatch that you were mentioning earlier that have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years all over the world. How this is another example that I think gives legitimacy to the so-called paranormal.
Yeah.
That these stories existed all over the world long before the internet, long before people from these distant countries could get together or share stories. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of years ago, prior to cars, planes, trains, even boats, in some mechanized boats anyway, in many cases. So, how could they have shared exactly the same kinds of details and very similar experiences with these beings all over the world. It was just impossible for them to do that way back when. So
Yeah,
it really is an awful lot of compelling evidence that they exist, that they're benevolent, and that they're here to help us protect this incredible place that we call home, our planet Earth. So
right.
yeah, yeah, I really share your feelings about it, Barbara, and that was a beautiful presentation with
Oh,
so much juicy information, yes, that people can run with after this if they'd like to find out more about Sasquatch. I think you've given them many, many places that they can go with this information.
oh, good.
Mm.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's a pleasure to share. And I just so much love it when people wake up to thinking, oh, I've heard about Sasquatch, but I don't know much about them, you
Mhm.
know, to be able to share some. And there are people who know a lot more than I know, but um, I just enjoy sharing about them because I think they're very special and they're here with us and we're living peacefully. And may it always be that way.
Yes, may it always be that way. That is a perfect note to end on. So may it always be that way. May we all think a bit more about being curious about what our reality really is, and also valuing our planet Earth and doing what we can to protect her. So on that note, thank you so much, Barbara, for this wonderful lecture. And everyone, please, as always, like and subscribe if you're interested in hearing more. By all means, leave us your comments and let us know how you're experiencing this series of interviews. We're going to keep on going with them. And also below this video, you'll find the information for Barbara's website and the books that she's written as well. So please keep coming back. If you're interested, let us know what you'd like to hear more about. And thank you for listening, everyone. And thank you, Barbara, for being here and sharing all of your wisdom and experience with us.
And thank you, Sinead. Wonderful.
Good night.
Night.